USOs simply means unidentified submerged objects, water-based UFOs or water-based UAP. That's it. And, you know, I'd heard of this type of phenomenon for many, many years. It's always been very interesting. I mean, to me, intrinsically, it's interesting to hear a story about an object that comes out of the ocean, making a big display like that. And I thought, I mean, how many of these stories exist? I have a website with a lot of amazing members, and they'll ask me questions. One person asked me a question about a particular case from 1945 near the Aleutian Islands, a little island called Adak Island out there. And there is a case from the summer of 1945 where a U.S. transport ship, the Pacific War was still happening. They were returning from Japan to Seattle, and they were by the Aleutians, and apparently an object appeared to have come out of the water, a disc-shaped object, circles around the ship twice and then takes off. So that was a case that was somewhat known to me, and it's known to other researchers. And I just did like a little bit of extra research, and I'll put together like a little video, things like that from my website. But I got really intrigued by it. And I thought to myself, this is 3 years ago, so in 2022, I thought, what other good cases are there? Like, I just wanted to pull them together. And I started to realize there were a couple of books that had been done on this. It was a book back in 1970 by an American researcher named Ivan Sanderson, a very good book. There was another very good book by the recently deceased researcher named Carl Feind, who wrote a very good book on water and UFOs. But not much else. There was a couple of others here and there. And I thought, I want to collect them. How many can I find? Like, that was where I started. And are they good? And I just got more and more into it. I started doing more of these little mini presentations for my website, and it just became, by the summer of 2022, it was kind of a mania. And I thought, I'll see if I'll do a book, see what I come up with. And that turned out into what will be a 3-volume project. The first volume I just published a couple of months ago, and that will be followed by the other 2, which will be out this year. I've collected about 700 cases. There's many more than that, I've no doubt. I eliminated quite a few in looking for them because I really wanted cases that had some meat on the bones that you could kind of work with and give a good description of. So I've got about just under 700 from around the world, and some of them go back kind of far, not into the distant ancient. The first really good case that I consider good is actually only from 1717, so like 300 years ago. It's a pretty good case, though, and then they become better over the years, a lot more detail. And I just started collecting them. I wanted to breathe like fresh life. 99% of them are completely forgotten, even by like experienced researchers. I think they're just completely, they've gone by the boards. And I thought they deserve a fresh retelling of them. And I wanted to do that. And then it just morphed into more and more things. I ended up getting a really great illustrator, a man named Alan Levine, who's a wonderful man, and did beautiful illustrations for this project. And I did a bunch of other things. I wanted to put each one on a map. I did that, and I ended up doing a statistical analysis that I did not anticipate doing when I started, but that became kind of a significant thing too. And that taught me more about this phenomenon, just looking at some of the statistics that seemed to jump out at me. So all in all, like you're seeing this phenomenon evolve over, especially the last couple of hundred years. It's like a little dance, like where they're observing us, we're observing them. And there is reason to believe that they've adapted some of their behaviors due to our radical transformation of our own technology, especially over the last century. I mean, it's kind of an amazing thing. You know, you think of where we were in the oceans a little over 100 years ago. The first operational submarine didn't deploy until the year 1900. And that was just like, you know, barely able to get in there. So we were not really going deep into the water until the 20th century. So
now we have hundreds of them circling the oceans, loaded with nuclear warheads.
Exactly. So that's a major, like, imagine you're them. Let's say you are them. You're here. you're watching these humans, these observant, intelligent, multi-fingered humans who can manipulate their environment, who are now organized into these collective aggressive communities we call nations, peering over the fence at each other with deadly weapons that could end the entire planet's existence. And you're watching this and you're realizing, okay, so they're probably this far away from developing strong AI, from quantum computing, and from leaping into our world. Like, when's that going to happen? Right? Because like you can see the whole trajectory. You know that like a few generations ago, they were all living in wooden huts, and now, wow, like here we are
to reach the singularity.
Yes, exactly. So I have little doubt that any observing intelligence, like they can see this whole thing play out. And so they're watching. But I have no doubt that we have our own little unique variations on the theme of developing intelligence. Maybe we're more aggressive. Maybe we're not as, I don't know. But we're certainly very aggressive with each other. We're highly territorial. So they're watching all of this, and they're seeing, 1950s, we start developing nuclear submarines that can stay underwater basically forever. Mm-hmm. And we develop these underground sonar systems that are mapping all activity, or increasingly more and more underwater activity, including anomalous activity, right? Mm-hmm. And not just Soviet or Russian subs, but everything.
Yeah.
And so they have to adapt. And I think when I was looking at the statistics of this, this whole thing happened because I finished writing all the cases, and I'm talking to my wife, and she's like, it'd be a great idea if for each case you had like a bunch of categories, so that someone could just like look at the categories, like what color was the craft, what shape was the craft,
yes.
What was it doing with was it under the water, did it emerge from the water, how close are the witnesses? And I'm like, damn it, that's a really good idea. I didn't want to do it because it was a lot of extra work. I had to go back over every case and siphon out that information. But it was a great idea, and I did do it. And I'm very glad I did it, because then that allowed me to put all of that into a spreadsheet and look at like almost 700 cases and like 20. It's a big spreadsheet.
So it's like a database you've built.
Yeah, and anyone can download it. It's a free download. I have
cool.
it linked on my website. You can go check it out. But basically, I'm an amateur with statistical analysis. I can't pretend that I'm some genius at it, but you can still see things. So like one thing I noticed is one category was I broke it down into day or night. Simple. Did this happen when the sun was out or when it was dark? Like very simple little metric there. And one thing I noticed was that up until around 1967, 68, it was almost exactly 50-50 day versus night. And then suddenly, starting in the late 60s.
USOs.
Yeah, USOs, exactly. Starting in the late 60s, it goes to 75% at night. And it remained that to this day, 75%. Now, I mean, does that mean I just have too small a data sample and I need to get more cases? Maybe. Could it be that I was just somehow not selecting a broad spectrum of cases? I mean, all of that's possible. I don't think so. I try to pick what I thought were the best and most meaty cases, and something seems to have happened in the late 60s.
How do you go about mining all this information? Do you just look for and just scrub the internet for cases involving USOs, or do you interview specific people, ask them?
A little bit of both.
Okay.
Mostly pulling out the information from. There are a couple of websites where there's a lot of information. So one is the National UFO Reporting Center, that's run by a very wonderful man named Peter Davenport, who's run it for years, and they've got 100,000 or more cases there that he's collected, going back many years. So that's important. MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, has a database which they graciously allowed me to use their database, which is nice because I'm not a MUFON investigator, but they knew what kind of work I was doing. And they said, yes, you can. And then I mentioned Carl Feint earlier. He had a website where he collected a bunch of these cases. So I looked at all of those, and then there's books and like out-of-print magazines from the 1970s that I'd look for and just get them and find these cases.
Where are people seeing these USOs?
Everywhere.
For the most part, is there one spot in the world where they seem to be mostly condensed to or confined to? And second question is, what kind of people are reporting these?
Yeah, there are hotspots. We probably, part of the problem with USOs is we're all like, we live on the land. We're landlubbers. And so usually you're not out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. So That's a problem right there. Navies are, the U.S. Navy is, but they don't like to talk. You'll get Navy stories from some Navy guy like 20, 30 or more years after they retire, when sometimes anonymously they will report something to some website somewhere.
Yeah.
Like that happens. And I've tried to collect all of those. They're very interesting. But basically we are, so when people see these, they're usually on the coast. Or maybe they're on a lake or a river, but if it's an ocean base, which is most of them, it's along the coast. That's where people...
What about like oil rigs?
Yeah, a couple of them. There's a good one from the Gulf of Mexico. Gulf of America? Gulf of Mexico? What am I
Gulf
supposed
of
to say?
America, brother. America. That's where we are, right there. Gulf's right there.
Exactly. So there's quite a few from the Gulf here, quite a few. And one of my favorite ones, this is from the National UFO Reporting Center. It's from 2017. It's not that long ago. A guy operating on a rig wrote into New Fork, the website, and he described this. He said, I was with a bunch of other guys on our rig, and there was another rig, he said, a couple of miles over this way, and in between this humongous, gargantuan, like football field plus size object comes out of the water, dripping water, flying saucer, disc shape.
Football field?
That's what he wrote. We're watching it drip water. We're kind of blown away, and it just zips off. It's gone. Now, how do you investigate that? It's almost impossible. So Peter Davenport wrote as an addendum to this case. He said, I spoke with the witness on the phone. Peter will do that sometimes. He said, I found him to be highly credible, highly this and that. And like, apparently this was a very well-spoken, believable individual. Peter found him credible. And that's really all that we have on this. But it's a pretty interesting story, and I read the account, and that's one of the cases that goes into the third volume of my study.
Did that corroborate any other accounts? Were there any other similar accounts with football field? Really?
Yeah. Also, not just USOs, but you get UFO cases of gargantuan-sized objects that have been reported over the years. You wonder, like, what are they doing? It's like a small city, It's the best place to hide. It really is. The oceans are... Yeah, there's a really great guy named Dr. Kevin Newth out there. He teaches...
I've heard of that name.
Yeah. Kevin's a really good man. He teaches at Albany and in New York State.
I think he's on our list, Steve.
He's coming on the podcast.
Is he really?
Yeah, he's good.
Shout out to Kevin.
Well, yeah, he made a really good insight on this, and he just said, look at the ocean. So a lot of things about it. First of all, it's non-compressible. In other words, the pressure is constant. So that could be helpful. It's certainly a protective, like if you are from a place where maybe our solar radiation is not necessarily the right thing for you. You come from somewhere else, the ocean is a protective place for that. Its temperature variations are far less in the ocean than they would be above the ocean. And a lot of other things. He said, there's a lot of good reasons if you are from somewhere else. What if you are from a water society?
Sure.
Well, the oceans might feel like home. So there are good reasons. And then, of course, there's
also,
the human.
Our skies are just littered with airplanes. So there's that.
Yeah, and if you are interested in these human creatures, well, you know that they live on the land, so they might hang out in the ocean, stay out of the way. So there's good reasons that the oceans would be, providing you have the technology to do it. But if you've got that, then sure, why not? You asked for hotspots, so I'll answer that. One is Puerto Rico, and particularly, I think all around Puerto Rico.
Really?
But especially the east, west, and northern coasts. The southern coast, yeah, but I think I just haven't found as many. But along the, you get like northwest Aguadilla, or you go out to the east. The U.S. Navy's got a big presence at a place called Roosevelt Roads there, facing Vieques Island. There's a lot of activity there. But north of the island, you've got the Great Puerto Rico Trench, which goes almost 30,000 feet down. It's super deep, and we can't get down there. But there are...
I'm sorry, how deep did you say it was?
About 29,000 feet, I think maybe close to 30,000 feet. So you're talking...
Can you find a map
almost 6 miles down. It's not quite as deep as the Mariana Trench in the Pacific, but it's close. And it's quite large, it's several hundred miles. So you have... there are a number of pretty good cases from that area. He's pulling something up.
And who is reporting these cases in Aguadilla? Or around northern Puerto Rico?
Aguadilla, yeah, that's not exactly at the trench, but it's not that far from it, I guess.
Right. Or around this area, roughly.
The cases go, good Puerto Rico trench cases go back to the early 60s that I found, maybe even in the 50s, but they really start to collect in the 60s, early 1960s. There's some good Aguadilla cases from the 70s and the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s. Like they've got throughout. There's quite a few interesting ones. There's a picture
Click on that
the
Puerto Rico trench. Go to that one to the left of there, top left. Yeah, right there. Blow that up so I can see it. Oh, wow.
Tilted.
So that is that northeast, south? Is that oriented the right way or is that reverse?
It's
northern plate is over here.
Yeah.
So that north is to the right.
Correct. Yeah.
And that would mean that Aguadilla is where?
On the top left.
Top
right, excuse me.
Top right.
Exactly.
Okay, I see.
Where you got it.
Yeah, that gets really deep right there. Wow.
Yeah. It's super, extremely deep.
Are there military people that are reporting any of this stuff?
Yes, absolutely. Well, reporting is a hard way to put it. So years after the fact, these stories will come out, in a variety of ways.
Yeah.
So Puerto Rico is one hotspot. We hear a lot of talk about California's Catalina Island.
Oh, yes.
Near LA there. Yeah. That absolutely. The entire Atlantic seaboard of the United States going into Canada. Florida, where we are, is extremely, very, very active on all sides of the peninsula.
Really?
Florida, yeah. Absolutely. But going all the way up the eastern U.S. coast. But then here's the problem with this. So USOs, just like UFOs or UAP now, it's very U.S. dominated in terms of reporting. Americans report this stuff way more. We have better reporting infrastructure. We've got MUFON and we've got the National UFO Reporting Center. Mm-hmm. And so we're able to get these. Other regions of the world, I don't really think that they have the same infrastructure for collecting these cases.
Right.
It's hard. Now, there are some areas, Italy, the Italian researchers have collected a lot. They do a lot of very good work out there. Mm-hmm. And you get some good cases out by Norway and Britain, absolutely.
What about South America?
Yeah, South America, there's good. I mean, I would have tended to think I'd find more because you kind of know there's a lot of activity going on in South America. And there's a decent number of USO cases, yeah. So down by Buenos Aires and Argentina, also all along Brazil. Brazil's got a lot.
Brazil's got a crazy history, just in general, of UFOs.
Yes, absolutely.
I recently learned about that Jacques Vallée book where there was a massacre down there.
Colares.
Yeah.
Yes, at the Amazon, the Delta reaching out to the Atlantic Ocean in the late 70s. Yes. And there's a lot of those that are genuine USO cases. So many of those were seen in the water, coming out of the water, entering the water. That's an incredibly ecologically important area, part of this world. I mean, it's the most massive amount of water flow, I think, going into any ocean on the planet.
The Amazon River?
Out of the Amazon. It's massive. This is incredibly ecologically important and rich estuary where you've got... It's just very important. So maybe there's part of that that's going on. Maybe they're interested in that.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, there were some cases in the late 70s there where people were killed and severely injured by these objects. And that definitely appears to be the case.
Yeah, it was a lot, it seemed like. The way it was described to me was that there was it seemed like a slaughter of people, or just a lot of people being murdered, and not in a kind way, by something.
Yeah, and in fact, there are claims that this type of thing goes on to this day. Not necessarily in that specific region, but other parts of South America. I have heard.
How recently?
Quite recently. There's a gentleman I know named Tim Alberino. I really like Tim. He went down. Where the hell was he? Was it Peru? Maybe. Anyway, just in the last few years, some very bizarre cases of human mutilation type cases that he was looking into. I wish I could
And these are with
I wish I could remember this a little bit better than I do.
Are these with indigenous people, or
Yeah.
are these with like English speaking?
Indigenous, not living completely indigenous lifestyles,
Yeah.
but very kind of like rural
Yeah.
South American type. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, they have some technology, so they're not.
They're not uncontacted tribes.
No,
but
no.
they are. Wow.
They live a more basic kind
Yeah.
of a life than we might hear with technology.
And they're described. Were there any details to like who was responsible for this, or like what their descriptions were of who was doing this stuff?
Well, there's, Tracy's in the next room. She could probably jump in on this better than I could. But I'll just say that there's reason to wonder that this was a human operation going on, that it's not necessarily an alien thing, that this could be some kind of really like a diabolical covert op type of a thing happening. Possibly. I don't want to say much more because I'm afraid I'm going to say something that's not accurate.
Oh, okay. I see.
But yeah, this is a subject where I think I started this 30 years ago thinking I'm going to go down this rabbit hole for a couple of months, and here you are, like it just opens up all of these fascinating and sometimes disturbing possibilities that are out there.
Out of all the USO cases that you went over, which one was it? Were there any that stuck out to you, or that
Many.
Really?
Quite a few that I think are just amazing.
What?
I could throw out a couple for you.
Throw a couple. Also, I want to know more about that 1717 case.
Yeah, I'll tell you that right now. That's right off the coast of Martinique. That's in the Caribbean.
Okay.
So it's not that far from where we are here. We're in Florida. The name of the captain, I cannot recall his name. Chevalier something. He wrote in his log. This is at it's after midnight, so it's dark. There was I looked into this. There was like a half moon out, so there was some light that was available. And what he claimed to have seen was a vertical orientation, like a rod. He said it was like a mast of a ship. So like I envision like a straight perpendicular rod of some sort, but above the water, moving along with his ship. It's not the best case, but it's not the worst. Like it was. I decided to include it because he wrote it in a very matter-of-fact way. It was like
1717.
1717.
Wow.
Yeah.
This is way before submarines, obviously.
Absolutely. And the 18th century, which that is part of, there's not many that I have found. There's an interesting one off the coast of southern France, I think from 1740. That's kind of interesting. And then there's one from a little small river in Scotland in 1767. And I think that might be it for the 18th, only like a couple of cases. Right. It really starts going, the first really good one that I just was kind of really taken by took place in 1825. And this was on a British vessel where they had just returned from Hawaii. In fact, there's a lot of interesting stories going on here. But they were coming back from Hawaii and they were going down the Pacific and they were going to end up in Chile.
Okay.
So they were down by the Cook Islands. So it's like way down in the south part of the Pacific Ocean. And it's 3:30 in the morning. The ship's, there was a naturalist aboard the ship. I think of like in the movie Master and Commander, the buddy of Russell Crowe, the captain, was this naturalist that they had aboard the ship. And it's around the same time period. So I'm thinking something like that. He writes in his log, this is 1825, his name was Andrew Bloxam. We've got his name. His book is published. You can find the PDF online. I have a link to it from my book. And he said, 3:30, the watch on the ship reported a spherical object emerging from the ocean. He said it was like, it looked like a red cannon shot coming out of the water. So it was like a deep orange type of a color, but incredibly bright. He said it was so bright, and he literally said you could pick a pin off the deck. It lifted up to a certain elevation and then went back down into the water and then came up a second time and then went back into the water. Now, how many naturalistic explanations can you think of that can account for this? I can't think of any. And Bloxham writes this in a very straightforward way. I mean, you read the rest of his diaries. I read some of it. I mean, he was clearly a very meticulous, very rational man, and very intelligent guy. And this just is this one bizarre entry in his journal from August 12th, 1825. That's a heck of a case. And I thought that's like the first really, really cool case.
Do you remember how close or how far they were from land?
They were off the Cook Islands. So those are, far. I don't know how close they were to that. They were, I don't think they were close to land. Okay. I think they were out there. They were out in the ocean. Wow. I don't know exactly. So he said, you know. And there's some other good ones from the 19th century. There's one from, what's that there?
I found the story. Block Sam with an X. Where is it? I just found it.
Oh, you got it?
Yeah. Well, this is the story.
Good. Good deal. Yeah.
What does it got? You got illustrations or what?
Yeah, I think this is the illustration of that event.
Oh.
Or at least it's included with the story.
Oh, okay. Looks like an iceberg behind it, right?
Yeah, they weren't by icebergs.
Yeah, Cook Islands, there wouldn't have been icebergs.
No. But that's the name, Andrew Bloxham, right there.
Interesting.
Yeah, the HMS Blonde, correct. That's the ship.
God, and what year again?
1825.
25.
Yeah.
Wow. And what was the size of the thing? Did they do?
I don't think he was a direct witness. So I think he was reporting what the Night Watch reported.
Ah, okay.
So there's that. So he's not a direct witness. So you can take that away from him.
Okay.
But they, I don't know if they had a really good size estimate. I get the impression it was kind of large. I mean, it was noticeable. It was very bright.
Lit up the deck of the ship.
By the way, so fast forward about 150 years to 1971.
Okay.
This is going into my next volume. And the USS John F. Kennedy aircraft carrier. So is near Puerto Rico, just saying. They were just finished what were called carrier qualifications. So they had done, this is a very involved series of exercises, and they had just completed that. It's 8:30, July 2nd, 1971. And the man operating communications, and we have his name. He in fact reported this to Stephen Greer 25 years ago, and it's in Greer's book Disclosure, which he wrote back then. And his name is James Kopf with a K, and he also reported this to a couple of other websites at the time. So he's operating communications on the JFK carrier, 8:30 at night, and he says, suddenly all of the communication, he discussed the way the communications on the ship were. He said incoming and outgoing. He said suddenly everything was just gibberish. Not everything coming in was just garbled messages. He's like, what's going on here? And then he hears, I'm laughing, but it's kind of not that funny. He hears on the intercom someone screaming, "It's God, it's the end of the world." So he's thinking, what is going on? He's able to go out and look, and he sees almost what is described in Bloxham's account from 1825. He sees a glowing orange sphere hovering above or near the JFK. He said it gave off about half the strength of sunlight. So it's kind of bright. And there are sailors who were having a really difficult time emotionally with this. One, he said later, definitely had to be sedated in some way or another, and whatever. So he's watching this for maybe half a minute, not long, and then the ship goes to battle stations, general quarters, so they've all got to go. So he has to go back to his communication station, where he says for the next 20, 25 minutes, the ship was on general quarters and communications were just down. And he also stated that he believed that the weapons, like aircraft, like I think what do they have, F-4s, they were not operational. So the aircraft would not fly or weapons would not operate. So anyway, I mention this because that glowing spherical object, I mean, to me, it's almost it seems like it could have been identical to the one from the 1820s. And you get this same type of glowing globular sphere.
Wow.
Yeah, like what is that, right?
What is that? I wonder how many of them there are. You know, because like the first one that I ever heard about was the Tic Tac.
Yeah.
And that thing was like zooming around, zipping around, and I think it was
I think there's a good
Fravor.
chance there was something below the water there too.
Oh,
This
you
is
think,
what it
you think
looks
there was
like.
a bigger ship that it came out of or something like
I think
that?
so, yeah. There's talk about that, and it's not 100% confirmed, but that's what I think is probably the case. But yeah, well, the Tic Tac's a great case, for sure. Absolutely, for sure.
I mean, that one's like, apparently it's documented on all of his radar, right? Even though it hasn't been
Yes.
released.
Well,
the
yeah, there's
footage.
a lot of good witnesses for that. Kevin Day, who operated the radar aboard the USS Princeton, who's a very decent man, is a friend of ours, was there and has talked about this in great detail. And of course, we have David Fravor's testimony, and a number of the other witnesses now have come out who have discussed it. So I don't think that we have any doubt that something very, very unusual happened there for sure, of extremely high order of intelligence as well. I mean, anything that can appear at what's called the cap point before
You get there.
they get there, it's
It's like time travel.
Putoff called it space-time metric engineering. Maybe that's what they're doing.
Wow.
In some way.
And that's San
could be a
Diego,
form.
right? That's not anywhere near Catalina.
It's off the coast that happened off the coast of Lower Baja California.
Oh, that was near Baja, California.
I think, yeah, a little south, probably southwest of San Diego, I think.
Okay.
Not that far, you know,
Right.
but out there in the Pacific.
I have
Yeah, there's a lot of crazy stuff out in the oceans.
I have a friend who lives in Tijuana, and he says there's all kinds of like UFO stuff going on out there, especially like in the like USO type stuff and stuff that you really don't hear about in like the media in the US.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of anecdotal information in Mexico. I have, we spoke to a couple of years ago a gentleman who had an interesting USO account off the Yucatan part of it, on the other side.
Oh, really?
But I don't think they get reported officially. So they're just like the stories are floating around there, as it were. And I have no doubt there's far more cases that are connected to Mexico than we probably, than I have been able to find. I very much believe that the significant portion of this phenomenon is from non-human intelligence. And the reason I believe that is I look at the earliest history of this, particularly like post-World War II, but even there are some very, I would say good, not perfect, but good accounts from prior to World War II that are worth looking at as well. And so when you look at some of these early cases, and then particularly when you read the declassified documents that I mentioned earlier that are available, it's hard for me to square that with a secret U.S. black budget project. It just doesn't, because all the intelligence officers that we know of at the time in the 40s were looking into this, and there's nothing that I have seen that really even you mentioned Joseph Farrell's work.
Yeah.
Were we on camera when we talked about Joe? I can't.
Where are we, Steve? I don't remember. Well, anyways,
Yeah,
we were talking about Joseph Farrell before this thing started.
And I'm a friend of Joe's, and I respect and admire his work a lot. But I don't even think that he has made a clear-cut case that it's definitely all like, Third Reich tech and all of that. I mean,
there's definitely the Horton brothers, which was
yeah. There's the Horton brothers,
Yeah.
and I think now we're seeing more and more support for the idea of a 1933 Italian recovery.
Right.
Italian.
This is, I think, Grush talked about this, right?
Grush talked about it. Malmgren in his interview with Jesse Michaels, and Eric Davis in his congressional briefing talked about it. So we're seeing all these different perspectives coming in on this. The real man who researched this is an Italian researcher named Roberto Pinotti, who looked at a lot of the original documents that do exist in Italian from 1933. And
Interesting.
so I think, yes, like this goes back farther in time, then a lot of the American researchers, like, because we're so American-centered, it's like Roswell, it all starts there.
Yeah.
No, I think there's, even in the U.S., there were prior cases to Roswell, but certainly this 1933 case.
So you think the fact that these cases or crash recoveries, retrievals, whatever you want to call them, they go back so far earlier than the 1940s, you think that points to it being of non-human origin just because of how advanced it was and how early it was?
Yeah, I think so. That's what I believe in.
And where do you think they would have come from? I know we're being super speculative here. I'm just saying, like, if
I would say another planet.
Another planet. Right.
Or there's a couple of different ways to look at this. So, Hal Puthoff wrote a very interesting paper a number of years ago on ultra-terrestrials, this concept. And it's a very interesting paper. I highly recommend people read it. And I think his take, and he just mentioned this the other day in his interview, but maybe there's been a group that's been here a long time that originally comes from elsewhere. They've set up shop in some manner, which I think is a totally possible. I would imagine that the extraterrestrial hypothesis actually still makes more sense to me than anything else. I mean, we can get attracted to interdimensional theories, but does anyone actually even understand what another dimension would be? Like, how does that work? How do they materialize in our? Maybe it's possible, but I don't really understand how that's possible. I can understand how it could be possible, even despite the vast distances, to go interstellar if you can manipulate space-time in some way, bending space-time. We have math for that. A guy named Miguel Alcubierre in the 90s apparently came up with some version of warp drive mathematically. The problem is finding the amount of energy sufficient to do it. But
same thing with I think that's the same thing with time travel, right?
I think so, yeah. So
I love Michael Masters' time travel theory.
I don't know if I'm on top of that one, so maybe you can educate me. Yeah. But I guess I'll just say I think the fact that they come from another place still makes the most sense to me. The fact that we would be of interest makes a lot of sense to me. The fact that Earth would be a very interesting place also makes a lot of sense to me. I think all of that makes perfect sense. That if you have the ability, if you've achieved a technological capability to detect advanced life elsewhere, which I don't see that as impossible at all. I mean, we're already looking at exoplanetary systems and looking for life signatures, and we just started with this business. So if you've been doing this for 1,000 years or more, maybe you can detect consciousness. You can go, we talked about remote viewing. Yeah. Could they actually have the ability to detect advanced consciousness? I don't know. Maybe they can. Or maybe there are other technologies that we just haven't envisioned. So they could find us. And then could they get to us? Yeah, probably. I don't see why not. At least in theory, I think it could be entirely possible. And we would be interesting because, A, there could be a lot of life in this universe, but how common, really, would planets like ours be? We're in the Goldilocks zone, but it takes a lot more than that.
Right.
We have
the moon.
We have the moon.
Incredible.
Which is, it's what's the word?
It's the perfect terraforming device. It's I think it's 1/20th the size of the sun and 1/20th the distance from the sun. I think I'm getting that math right.
Oh, it's a lot less than 1/20th the size.
Maybe I'm getting that math wrong, Steve. Maybe you can correct me with the fractions there. Anyways, the fractions are exact. The exact size comparison to the sun and the exact distance from the sun is equal. So it creates that perfect eclipse.
Yeah.
And so that makes
that's an amazing thing. If that's a significant part, the fact that it's a stabilizer of our environment is very significant. It's always got one side turned to the Earth. I can't remember the word for that, but that could be significant.
Tidally locked.
Yeah, thank you,
Steve. What's the fractions of the distance ratio, and the size ratio? Find that, and then it is the perfect terraforming device for us.
And it's sun size and distance ratio. There you go. You can figure that out. I'll let you
let us know,
work
Steve.
on that.
That's your homework assignment.
But we also have water and land. So but we're not completely covered in water either. So we have enough water for life to evolve in the water, but then we have enough land out of the water that life can crawl up and evolve on land. You know, I mean, that's kind of an interesting thing right there. And we've had enough stability over hundreds of millions of years that we can allow complex life to develop on land. And I mean, yeah, that can't be very common. Now, the universe is big enough that you could think, all right, maybe 1 out of a million systems might have something like this, or whatever it is, and that could still be enough to develop advanced life. And which I think I've come to believe. I'm not a expert in this at all, but I tend to think that life anywhere is going naturally to want to increase its complexity, just because life competes with other life for resources and energy and food, and that intelligence is one necessary evolutionary adaptation that would be useful for any life form, and not just humans. Dinosaurs were intelligent, hell. Not maybe compared to us, but compared to previous life forms, they probably were. Intelligence is always increasing.
Yes.
And, you know, our body plan just allowed us to hit the sweet spot. We developed these hands that can do things and manipulate our environment, and that further increased our intelligence, I believe. So I think life naturally will do that given the proper conditions.
Right.
And I'm going to guess that, you know, in enough parts of the universe, those conditions have existed so that you then develop life. And then it gets to the critical point where it develops its own ability to kind of manage itself, which we're maybe kind of doing. And we're developing strong AI and all the other technologies that'll go along with it, nanotech and who the hell knows what, quantum computing, and what kind of crazy diabolical mixture will come out of all of that. And I think that that's probably what other life forms have done, because I suspect that what intelligent life will do is it is guided by the requirements of constantly developing that intelligence. In other words, it's not about, like, our society isn't about the human race anymore. It's really about meeting the needs of the demands of a highly integrated, digitally advanced, artificially intelligent system of which we are now just a part. Like, we think it's working for us, but I think we're serving the system. And we're serving the system that is becoming ever more complex. And that intelligence will just kind of take off on its own. Because I think it's the intelligence that's the dominant factor, not necessarily our biological contribution to it.
Interesting.
Yeah, I don't know if anyone actually ever thinks that, or if I'm the only person, but this is what I've come to believe. Like, we serve the system that we have helped to create. But really, we are simply actors, or we're
the caterpillar.
Yeah, we're like the servants of what high intelligence demands. And that's what we're doing.
What do you think we look like? What do you think human beings, or what comes out of human beings, ends up being in like 50 to 100 years?
Well, it all depends on, because all that we do is we adapt to the environments that we live in. And we are now radically changing our own environment technologically in all different ways. And so clearly you're seeing probably a speeding up of human evolution is probably happening.
Right.
I think it is.
Right.
Experts would be better able to say this than me, but I think it's quite. I mean, look, even in the last
technology, right?
Yeah, in the last 10,000 years, we're not the same as we were back then. So, and we've domesticated ourselves. It's just like you look at domesticated sheep as opposed to wild sheep. Well, domesticated humans as opposed to wild humans.
Right.
Before we started settling in large communities and societies, roughly 10,000 years ago. So we're going on a path. So what we're going to look like, the problem with our future is that every new technological leap you make, whether it's mastering the use of fire or stone tools, or now working at it, getting to AGI and whatever else we're going to get to, means that you become dependent on that for your species survival. Like, honestly, like, once we've had fire for like a couple of 100,000 years,
right,
it would be very difficult for those people to survive without it.
Yes.
Because you become dependent on it. And then not only that, but the fact that you have fire means you have to develop all of these other technologies because we have to maintain the fire. We have to protect the fire. We have to find and process the right kinds of wood. Like all of that prompts further intellectual development. Same with stone tools and all that. So once you develop that, you have to maintain it. And now we're so deeply embedded in our technology. Can you imagine? Spain and Portugal just went without electricity for 5 hours last week. I have a sister who lives in Seville. And
trust me, I live in Florida. I had to go through a lot of hurricanes. I know
there
it's like
exactly. So, but they were freaking out, man. They were not happy. So imagine if we had to go without electricity. Forget internet, just electricity.
Yeah, it sucks.
Well, that's even worse. For a week, 2 weeks, a month, forever.
It would suck.
It would more than suck because most people would probably not live.
Going back to this, this technology conversation and the evolution of human beings is really, it's something I've been thinking about a lot recently. And it was interesting because I think Hal and Rogan touched on it a little bit on their conversation. But, one of the ideas that I've been throwing around is the idea of like this ESP telekinesis, having these senses that are not apparent in everybody, but they're kind of like extra. Some people have them more than other people. And especially when it comes to things like remote viewing and ESP. So like ancient human beings, right? Before we had the development of language, before we had the technology to record memories externally, and when we constantly were trying to avoid predators to stay alive, and before we had anything, like I'm sure we had some sort of extra senses that have atrophied since we've developed language, since we've developed computers. We don't have to memorize shit anymore. Everything's on a computer or an iPhone, and you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
So I feel like that is we have senses that are radically have been diminished and atrophied over millennia.
My wife and I talk about this a lot. This is like one of our pet theories that we've been hashing around for a couple of years. Excuse me, I totally believe that that's the case. We actually are, the brain capacity of the human being today is less than it was among our ancestors, even more than 10,000 years ago. I think it's like the amount of a golf ball, or no, more than that. I think maybe a baseball amount of brain. We have less. We have a little bit less. And that doesn't mean that we're less intelligent. It just means that domestication has enabled us to need less, because the brain's expensive. I mean, in terms of energy, like it's not free. And so you have to have a reason for it. It's got to provide an evolutionary benefit for you to use it. And very likely, I think that you're right. I think that's true. Like we've probably atrophied. And what that, of course, this is material that I'm just I shouldn't even really talk about, but you hear people talking about microtubules in the brain and the ability to access quantum information in some way. Yeah. And I'm probably saying this wrong in countless ways, but essentially that we have the capacity to perceive some various forms of non-locality, things that are far away that logically you wouldn't think we were able to perceive. But hell, remote viewing proves that you can. And I think it's a fair theory or a fair notion that our ancestors did a better job at this than we do.
And another thing about, so we were just talking about how like there's other Goldilocks planets, and there might be, there definitely are, we know of, that are really, really far away, but like we are so rare in this solar system. All the different species that exist on Earth, I think so this is kind of getting into what Mike Masters explained to me. He's a anthropologist, and he was explaining to me there's over 2 million species of animals.
I didn't mean to interrupt you. Isn't he the one who, am I getting my people mixed up? He came up with a paper about a year or two ago that got a lot of attention. And I should stop. I'm probably getting it wrong. Anyway, keep going, please.
Yeah. So he's an anthropologist, and he's wrote a bunch of books on his I think it's not his most recent one, but one of them is called the extraterrestrial model, and he basically explains, having a background in this stuff and evolution, is that there's 200 species of there's 2 million cataloged species on planet Earth. Out of the 2 million, 20 of them are hominids. Out of the 20 hominids, we are the ones that developed technology that was able to escape the Earth. So we are like 0.0001% of all species, human beings on Earth. So that is extremely rare for Earth, which is an extremely rare planet, being such a, having the moon the way it is, being this, having so much water and land, being inhabitable, teeming with life. So now let's go look at all the other Goldilocks planets that we know of that are so far away. How many of them have the same gravity, the same atmosphere, how many of them are water worlds or not? And what is the likelihood that those beings that evolve on that planet, that Goldilocks planet, are going to be exactly like the 0.00001% that ended up being human beings on this planet? So he's like, basically the case he made was it's virtually impossible for them to have 2 arms, two legs, upright walking hominids.
There I disagree. I disagree with that. I think respectfully, because I'm sure he knows what he's talking about. But no, I think that our body plan is probably not unique to us. And I think if you're going to, again, I think because what life does, life evolves and life adapts. And so if the necessary thing that you have to have is an ecosystem that can support enough diversity of life for this to happen. And yes, you need water and you need land. You need both. And so it's going to be very rare. Like, I completely agree with all of that. I think that's entirely right. But the fact that our body plan is an anomaly, I don't agree with that. I think our body plan is probably... I don't really, do we really truly understand what is the mechanism of evolution? What is it really? Is it truly just random mutation? Or is there something else going on? And I'm not going to pretend that I have that answer. But I think that somehow life, didn't Jeff Goldblum say this in Jurassic Park? Life finds a way. And I think that life does find a way through adaptation, through the need for survival, and luck, But like, this is, if you're going to engage in planetary domination of any capacity, honestly, I think this body plan of ours might just be the best way to do it. Because what you need is an ability to manipulate your environment. That's key. And so hands and fingers are perfect for manipulating environment. What's better than that? I don't know of anything that's been better. And then the thing is, once our, Australopithecine distant ancestors of 4 million years ago, or 3 million years ago, they realized, I could break this stone. Wow, this is really useful. So that encourages further intellectual development. Just even napping stones is like, that's a skill. So you're working cognitively here. And so I think adaptations, I don't think it's impossible that life would form adaptations similar to our own, that you would have humanoid beings that develop that way in other planets. I just think that I remember as a kid reading like what certain scientists thought like life elsewhere would look like, and some of those ideas were kind of goofy when I look at them now, and I don't think they make a lot of sense because a body has to be efficient, and and so you're looking at all of these different factors that go into it. And it seems to me that bipedal, standing upright with a couple of extra hands to do your job, like that's quite useful. And I could imagine that happening elsewhere.
What do you got, Steve?
Oh, the crab species convergence.
Yeah, it's similar to what he was talking about. Like you have 5 different species that have independently grown crab-like bodies. That's just what works in the ocean for little creatures like that. Independently, unrelated.
Yeah, it's convergent evolution.
Yes. Yeah.
Which means basically species that are not related to each other can, due to the environments that they live in, develop very similar. Like, bats can fly as well as insects can fly, and birds and that type of thing.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. When I brought this up to Greer, he was explaining to me he believes it has something to do with morphic resonance. This theory by Rupert Sheldrake, to when it's like some sort of a quantum idea. It's a quantum theory essentially. So I guess one of the examples that Sheldrake used was a monkey on one side of the world discovers some sort of technology, figures out how to crack a cracks a coconut open with a rock or whatever, and at the same time, in this quantum field, the monkeys on the opposite side of the world figure out the same thing. Yeah. So he thinks that might tie into evolution between planets. He said this isn't just on Earth.
Yeah. Hey, I'd entertain that. I mean,
Yeah.
There's The Secret Life of Plants, which came out over 50 years ago, which talks about there's all different ways. We know that fungi under the ground are somehow, I don't understand it, can be a means of communication among plants.
Right.
All right. So how does that work? I don't know. So something like that could, sure. The interpretation of what happened with Paul Benowitz that is still an open question, in my opinion.
Oh, really?
Well, to the extent that why was Air Force Office of Special Investigations or CIA possibly or any of these other groups going after Paul Benowitz to screw with his head? Mm-hmm. They were. Like a great book on this was done by Greg Bishop called Project Beta.
Project Beta?
Yeah, it's a very fine book. I don't fully agree with every conclusion that Greg has, but he did a really excellent job, and he deserves kudos for that. But the basic question is so Paul, for people who don't know this, Paul Benowitz was a kind of a small U.S. defense contractor in the 1970s. He lived right near Kirtland Air Force Base in New Mexico, and he's able to see, he's by the Manzano weapon storage area there, I think. I'm trying to remember this now. Anyway, so he's watching things going on over there, like bizarre aerial activity.
Right.
And he's got sophisticated tracking information equipment and things like this to look at it. And he's convinced that there are flying saucers or something like that happening. And he's a good patriotic American. He literally wrote to President Reagan after 1981 about this.
Wow.
Like saying, you've got to get on top of it. And so he was becoming a hassle and a potential security risk for the people over at Kirtland, whatever they were doing. So Greg argued, and I cannot remember what the Magic Man documentary actually argued here.
I think the claim was that essentially, like, 30,000 foot view is that he was a conduit of disinformation into the UFO community to poison the well of the UFO community because they knew there were Soviet spies there.
Yeah, that's potential.
Okay. That's what I took from it.
There's definitely espionage, and there's definitely the attempt to muddy the waters of the UFO community. But the question is, what was Paul Benowitz actually observing? So was he observing advanced U.S. defense systems that were then being tested, or was he seeing something more than that? And I tend to think that maybe a little bit of both. I don't think it was all just that they were only protecting their own tech. I guess that's my own position. I think Benowitz was seeing things that were not all ours. And I only say that because first of all, there were a number of other people who are associated with this who firmly believed he was seeing more than that. But also when you look at the history of violations of sensitive airspace of U.S. bases across the entire U.S., this is an old story. So it's not a unique thing to Kirtland. It's something that, and through the 1940s and 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s, that was all still happening. It never stopped. And so I think it's very premature to just dismiss it all as saying he was only looking at our own secret tech. I actually don't believe that. But the fact that they went in and screwed with him.
And convinced him that it was aliens.
And allowed him to convince himself. That's what Richard Doty would say. And Richard Doty was very much involved in all of that.
Wasn't there a part of that documentary where they claimed the NSA moved in across the street and was beaming information into his house, saying that the aliens were trying to they were aliens trying to communicate with him. They were coming to Earth because their planet ran out of water. They're going to be here in 15 years, something along those lines.
Is that Magic Man? I actually can't remember that. So
that's what I remember from the Magic Man documentary.
Well, maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah. And then there was the whole part about the cattle mutilation, which was wild. You know, how they were doing the underground testing they were mining.
Is this a Myrna Hansen case? All of this was going on at this time. So there were cattle mutilations happening all in the mid and late 70s out in the Midwest and out in the Rockies. Right. And Benowitz got like really, really, really deep into this, that is for sure. And he hooked up with University of Wyoming, Leo Sprinkle, who used to do hypnotic regressions of people. And there was a woman, her name was Myrna Hansen. And she was, God, I can't remember. Did she witnessed a cattle mutilation, I think, or cattle being lifted up. But she was also supposedly taken to an underground facility herself. And Leo Sprinkle did the regression, and Benowitz, I think, was there. And they all got really deep into this. And Benowitz eventually was committed for, at least briefly, for psychiatric evaluation, like in the late 80s. This really got to him. It really messed him up, and it seriously damaged his life. It's very sad. And it does seem like he was being used for disinformation. Yes, I think that's absolutely true. And I wrote about this in one of my books, my second volume of history, called UFOs and the National Security State. And my feeling was, you look at the mid and late 70s, and two important things were happening to threaten the secrecy of the UFO subject at that time. One was, as we mentioned, the release of documents through Freedom of Information. This was a new thing. This had never happened before. You know, in the 50s and 60s, the U.S. Air Force could say, we don't know anything about these UFOs. I mean, it's a little bit, it's obviously people are making mistaken assumptions and things like this, but we're not really into that. We have this Project Blue Book, and we're not really finding any evidence of aliens. And they could get away with that until, in the late 70s, researchers were petitioning the government for documents pertaining to UFOs, and holy cow, like they got a lot of them proving that the Air Force was lying. They were lying through their teeth for years. And so that was one thing. So the Freedom of Information Act was a threat to the secrecy. And if you're on the other side of that, trying to guard the secrets, you have to be thinking, what is our exposure here? What do we have to worry about? Is if they shake the tree enough, is something going to fall out of that tree that's really compromising?
Right.
Like what came out was compromising enough, but anything worse. So that's one problem. The other problem was, this was when UFO crash retrievals were starting to become a thing in researchers. It was all in the late 70s. This all happened at once. Prong number one was FOIA. Prong number two was crash retrievals. And so we have like people like Stanton Friedman researching Roswell for the first time, things like this. But there were other crash retrievals that people were looking into or revisiting. There was a researcher no longer around called Leonard Stringfield, who back in the 70s and 80s was actively cultivating ex-Air Force and ex-military people, getting all kinds of stories about crash retrievals. It was kind of a first. Like no one was a magnet the way Stringfield was at that time. And so he started to publish his research bit by bit, you know, in these tiny little UFO journals that no one was reading, but they were coming out. And so, again, if you're managing the secrecy, and if there were crash retrievals, which it looks like there certainly were, you've got to be concerned, like, how long can this go before someone actually uncovers something that's truly compromising that we do not want out? And so the theory, and I think this is probably true, is you muddy the waters and you put out information that would sow the seed of doubt into documents. And this is one argument about the MJ-12 documents that came out in the mid-1980s. And it's possible that that's the case. And then the campaign against Paul Benowitz that we were just talking about could be part of that as well. This is like kind of the Empire Strikes Back. You know, you've got all of this, all of these threats to the empire of secrecy. And the late 70s, early 80s, they make the decision in the early 80s, like, let's do something about that. And which is the case, like to this day, new documents may come out and you've already got people saying, is this real? Exactly. Is this lies? Is this disinfo?
It's amazing to watch. It's
very effective.
It's really effective. I mean, so if they were going to that extent with Richard Dolan and Paul Benowitz it was the 80s that was happening.
Yeah. If
they were doing that in the 80s, imagine what they have the ability to do now with the internet. It's
highly sophisticated, obviously, and very likely they've got smarter people than we do, and they're probably many, many steps ahead. I think it's very tough to deal with them. Not impossible, but yeah, I mean, we're going beyond UFOs here or UAP. This is in a whole array of things, I have no doubt. But the UFO subject, which is the one that I'm most interested in, I think definitely we're in an era now since 2017, New York Times and Politico, they do their articles at that time, and it kind of breaks open the space a little bit where people can talk about this a bit more without necessarily their careers being destroyed through ridicule. So that's good. But to think then that the national security crowd is just going to walk away from the table and say, oh, yeah, here you go. Here's all of our secrets. Yeah, sorry about that. We were wrong. Mm-hmm. No, that's not going to happen. There's far too many reasons to maintain this and to fight every step of the way. So what I believe is happening in terms of all of this, like this has been an argument for almost a decade now with a lot of people. It's like, are we dealing with a covert op by the government to have a controlled and false release of UFO information to serve their needs? Or what I believe is we're looking at a factional struggle within that community where there are actually people who do believe in getting this information out to whatever extent they believe they want it out. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure if they even want it out fully themselves, but to some extent. But there's still the secrecy group, if we can call them that is absolutely not resolved to that at all, not reconciled to that, and they will fight every step of the way.